Welcome to today's course called Legal Structure Crash Course. As you can imagine, this is the course you need to take to find out what legal structure makes sense for your business. The instructor today is John Rabil, and John is the guru on what we consider risk management. So, if John, could you please turn to the next slide, please, and we'll repeat the Empower People oath. I, Tiffany Joy Green, do solemnly swear to accept the lifelong obligation to hone my superhero powers and apply those superhero powers to the good of the people I serve. I will promote and add to the ongoing success of Empower People, its members, and the people, organizations, and communities it serves. I will help prepare the next generation of superheroes. I am driven to be a positive change agent for those I serve and interact with. And now, without further ado, I will give the mic. It's not a real mic. We're going to pretend there's one, though, to John so he can talk to us about legal structures.
All right, thanks, Tiffany. Excited to talk a little bit about legal structures and why they're important and what some of the options are. So, a couple of outcomes to get out of this today. One is to understand what a legal structure is. There's sometimes some confusion around that, and I think this will clear a little bit of that up. Understand why a legal structure is important to your small business. Understand a few of the different types of legal structures, the most common ones out there. And then what are the legal structure formalities to pay attention to make sure you don't run into any issues as you start, form, and operate your legal structure? So I'm John Rabil. I'm a small business attorney, operates Entrepreneur Legal Advisors or ELA, and we work with small businesses and entrepreneurs as general counsel, essentially. And we do a lot of work assisting businesses in setting up and managing their legal structure. So what does legal structure mean? Essentially, it means what type of entity you formed for your company. So common examples are LLCs, corporations, nonprofit could be another one, or non-stock in Virginia, as they're called. Sole proprietorship and partnership are also legal structures, and we'll get into that a little bit more in detail as we work through this, but that's a quick overview of what a legal structure is. Why do you need a legal structure? For starters, it's extremely important to take advantage of limited personal liability. Not all legal structures are created equally. You want to look at the ones that will allow you to operate the way you need to and protect you personally from the liability of the business. That means the debts and other responsibilities of the company. You don't want personally to be on the hook for those. Common types of legal structures. These are probably the most common ones that I run across. You have sole proprietor, partnership, limited liability company or LLC, corporation, and nonprofits. So I'll go into detail a little bit more on each one of those. Sole proprietors are pretty easy to go through and dispense with. I can't think of really any situation where you would want to be a sole proprietor. It does not offer limited liability protection to the business owners. That means anything that goes wrong with the business, all the business debts, if the business gets sued, you individually can be on the hook for all of that. That means that someone can come after your house, your car, your bank accounts, everything. Everything's on the table. So your business gets sued, they can come after you. Your business has $100,000 in debt when it shuts down. That means you have $100,000 in debt. There isn't going to be any way to wall yourself off and protect yourself as an individual from what happens with the business. So that's risky. It's not, I don't think, ever advisable to get into that situation. There are too many other options that are easy enough to get going and can provide you some protection. Partnership, I like to think about that as sort of a sole proprietor with more than one person. Not a lot, let's say, generally areas where you'd want to be a partnership, especially a general partnership. That's just two or more people who come together and decide that they want to form a business. So similar to a sole proprietor, there's no limited liability protection here. Something goes wrong with the business, you're on the hook, your partners are on the hook, all your personal assets, anyone can come for them if the business has done something wrong. There's a extra complication with partnerships. Potentially your partner or partners could do something inappropriate and cause a lot of liability on the partnership, which you could also be on the hook for too. If your partner runs up $200,000 in debt for the partnership, someone's gonna be able to come look at you personally to collect that money as well. That's extremely risky. Again, other opportunities, other options to avoid that, and I would suggest doing so. All right, limited liability companies are the most popular legal structure I see for businesses these days for several reasons. They're flexible, they're easy to get started, they offer single members. I mean, there's it can only be one owner if you want, or you can have multiple members, as many as you want, basically. They don't have a lot of the same formalities that a corporation does mandated by law. They can basically be set up to run any way you want. And importantly, now you have limited liability if you set it up and run it properly. So that means that the owners can shield themselves from the liability of the company. The debts, the obligations, the liabilities can all be separated from the individual owners and be on the company itself. So that's very important to remember in terms of what type of legal structure will work for you and what are the real benefits. Corporation, this is like an Inc. INC. See a lot of those. They are a little bit more involved to set up than LLCs. You usually have directors, board of directors, officers, and there's a hierarchy you work through. They have more formalities in terms of record keeping. You issue shares to the owners to evidence ownership. And so there's a little bit more involved with those typically, but they also have the major benefit of being or offering limited liability. So again, if a corporation is what you need to operate the way you want, it's a great option and it sets up that limited liability. Just make sure you're going through all of the formalities to wall off the owners, the shareholders with that. And then nonprofit, a lot of times nonprofits are corporations, but you typically form a nonprofit as like a non-stock company, for example, in Virginia. So I like to think of it as sort of its own legal structure. It has a lot of the similar formalities with a board of directors and officers. With nonprofits, there's really no owner. There aren't shareholders or members. The organization is there to serve a purpose and contribute to society. You do want to make sure you're getting it set up properly and running it properly, though, because the IRS is closely watching nonprofits to make sure everything's done appropriately from a tax standpoint. So there's oftentimes a lot of confusion that, oh, I'll just start up a nonprofit. In many cases, a nonprofit has more formalities, more management than certainly than an LLC and potentially a corporation to make sure that you're not going to get yourself into any trouble. All right. Legal structure formalities. Each legal structure has different formalities, and uh, we're going to ignore sole proprietors and partnerships for this purpose because I don't really think that they're applicable here. And like I said, you should probably try to avoid those at all costs. So I'll start with the formalities in terms of what an LLC looks like. So for starters, you register it with the state, Secretary of State, State Corporation Commission, whatever the case may be. You get it formed, and now it's in existence. Don't make the mistake of stopping there. You need to take some additional steps to really make sure you're taking advantage of the limited liability that's available. So you want to look at getting an operating agreement in place. Even if you're a single member LLC, you're the only owner, you still want to get an operating agreement. It shows that you've taken the steps necessary to set up a separate business. You've gone through that process and you've removed yourself individually from liability. If you are a multi-member LLC, then you want an operating agreement, one, for the limited liability, two, to make sure that you understand roles, responsibilities. What happens if somebody wants out? You can sort of gauge those things and prepare for them up front. Everybody's on the same page. It's easier to do it then and plan for some of those things that could come up down the road. That way they don't become major issues as you work through the business. So that's sort of your foundation with getting it started on the formalities for the LLC. You then want to make sure that you set up a separate bank account. Massive issue that's extremely important and a surprising number of companies neglect to do. If you don't have a separate bank account set up, it's the easiest way for someone to get through your entity and to you individually. So you got to get a separate bank account set up. You also want to make sure you're doing documentation of major company decisions. So if you're going to take out a $500,000 loan, you want to make sure that you authorize that loan according to your operating agreement. If you're multi-member, did you have to vote on it? Document all that. Keep a record of all of these decisions in a corporate book. It could just be an online digital file. That's fine. But you want to have a record of everything. It shows you've taken the proper steps. And then you typically want to do like a regular annual meeting, just authorizing what your company has done in the past year or something along those lines. Again, just formalities to make sure you take the necessary steps to limit your personal liability. That's a good rundown on LLCs. Corporations, in terms of formalities, are a little bit different. They require you to form them with the state again. So you will set that up. You will select how many shares you want to authorize. That's sort of dependent on your specific business and what you need. You can authorize a single share or a million, what have you, whatever works. You will then want to set up your internal documents for corporations. That's bylaws. So you'll need bylaws where you set out how the company is managed between the board of directors and the officers. So as part of this process, you're going to appoint a board of directors. You're going to appoint some officers, think of like president, secretary, vice president, what have you. Make sure, so certain states have certain requirements about this. You may want to make sure that you're following whatever your state specific laws are, or that you're properly working around them if that's an option. You set out your bylaws, get those in place, and now you're setting up your foundation for the corporation. So board of directors, officers, and you've got your bylaws in place. Bylaws have more formalities in terms of annual meetings and regular meetings. So if you did not address meetings in your bylaws, you're subject to the state default laws on how you have to operate that corporation. Be very careful to either address them in your bylaws or make sure you're following the state default so you don't operate outside the rules or outside the law. So some states may require quarterly meetings. Some may require an annual meeting. Some may be silent on it. You need to know what your rules are, what your bylaws say, and then you need to actually hold those meetings. They don't need to be in person necessarily, but you need to take minutes. You need to document what happened at those meetings, and then you need to sign off on them. Again, you keep them in a corporate record book, be a digital file. And then additionally, you need to pay attention to when and how you have to appoint officers. So you appoint someone a president when the company starts. That's not necessarily indefinite. You may need to appoint them every year or every 3 years. However you set it up or however the state dictates that you do it. Same thing goes for the board of directors. How does your board of directors run? Are they appointing their successors? Are they being elected by the shareholders? Make sure you understand the time frame. Are directors on for a year? Are they on for 3 years, 5 years? And then you need a process for replacing them. And you need to properly document all of that in a meeting of the shareholders or meeting of the directors. File all that with your corporate record book. And that way you've created this chain of evidence, shows you're running the corporation correctly, and someone can't get through the company to the individual owners. Limited liability. The formalities are an ongoing way to make sure you maintain limited liability with LLCs and corporations. Make sure you get a separate bank account with a corporation as well. Again, that's an easy one. Just always get a separate bank account. Keeps it simple, keeps the money separate, and avoids that issue. In the nonprofit world, in terms of formalities, it mostly follows everything we just discussed with corporations set up similar. Board of directors in nonprofits can have a lot of power, so you do want to make sure you understand how they're appointed, how they're replaced, and that you're documenting all of that appropriately. Good rundown of formalities to keep in mind as you're running the company. So, a few things to summarize here. Importantly, make sure that you formalize your business structure. I don't think you want to be a sole proprietor. I think it's unlikely that there's a situation where you want to be a general partnership. Probably looking at either an LLC, a corporation, or a nonprofit if you're going to be in that world. So you get that set up, whatever's appropriate, file the proper paperwork, get it running, and then really make sure not to overlook your formalities. It happens often. Someone sets up an LLC, they've got the paperwork from the state, and then for 3 years they've been running it without a separate bank account, violating a bunch of state rules that are in place because they don't have an operating agreement that says what they should do. All of that leads to potential personal liability. Huge problem. It's the whole reason of setting up a corporation or an LLC and doing all of this work is so you aren't personally liable. So don't overlook the formalities that you should constantly do as you're operating the business. And you can set up a process or a system to remind yourself to do them, or, someone can help you make sure you stay on top of those. But it's extremely important to, one, formalize it first. Two, make sure you follow those formalities and understand how all that works for your specific business. One thing to be careful of is every business is unique, whether you're a single member LLC or a 15 member or 15 shareholder corporation. Be very careful with templates. Bylaws go with corporations, operating agreements go with limited liability companies or LLCs. I often see cases where someone has set up an LLC and then they adopted bylaws for their LLC. That's a problem. Make sure you have the right documents and then make sure you understand how those documents work and how your business needs to run according to them or according to any of the default state laws that you may not have addressed. And so, in terms of formal business structures, I think what they do is they allow companies to create a dedicated mission, a vision. And so then you can establish what your purpose is, and you can use the structure to build your purpose, build your mission, push that out to your customers, clients, to the public, and then protect you, individual owners. So it's very important, even in small companies, even if you're a sole owner, single member LLC, single shareholder corporation. It's important that you formalize these things. That'll allow you to drive your purpose. It'll open up opportunities with other people and companies who are looking for purpose-driven, formalized companies to work with, collaborate with, do business with.